Last week we started a resurrection series, and I made this statement. I said, we have this simple phrase: don't take it lying down. And we all kind of have an idea, hopefully, of what that means, but the idea is that, we're not going to take something lying down. We're not just going to accept something just because somebody said it, or just accept it and be walked over. It's pretty common saying in that idea of, well, I'm not going to take that laying down. Who are they to tell me? We live in a world that kind of lives in this mode. And the sad part is we live in this mode, but we don't actually know sometimes what we're talking about. So when it comes to God, I don't believe that God wants to take anything laying down. I don't think God is taking your sin laying down. You see, God is so holy that the idea of sin, He's not going to lay down and just let it happen. And he so desires to have a relationship with you that even from day one, even before He laid the foundations of the earth, He already had the plan to fix it. You see, because God isn't laying down. He's not stuck in a place where, He isn't paying attention to what's going on. And last week we looked at the first time we see Jesus lying down. Now, the very first time we see Jesus lying down is literally when He's born. They placed Him in a manger. And it's interesting because here God has got this plan to save you and I. And it starts by putting a baby in a manger. I mean, think about it. What a peaceful place. Well, maybe not all that peaceful. It was a feeding trough. It was probably outside somewhere where there were sheep around. It probably wasn't the greatest place to have a child. But this is God's plan. God's plan is that He is going to redeem us, and He's going to redeem us with His Son, and His Son had to be fully human, so His Son had to show up as a baby, just like you and I. Do you know there's nobody on the earth that was born an adult? And the sad part is that sometimes we think as adults we got it all figured out. And really, sometimes I think kids got it figured out better than us. You ever noticed when you ask adults to pray for you? Sometimes there's a sense of doubt in their mind. Well, I'll pray, but I'm not really sure, But you ask a kid to pray for you, I'll tell you something. If you really want some solid prayer, honest prayer, go ask a kid to pray for you. Because first of all, they're going to be straight up honest. They're going to tell you, okay, I'll pray. If they're willing to pray for you, they'll pray, and it won't be, well, maybe. It'll be, okay, God, this is... I used to ask kids all the time to pray for me. And they would look at me like, Pastor, you want me to pray for you? Oh, yeah. I'd rather have a kid pray for me. So we explore the fact that the Father has this plan, and the baby in the manger was the first step in that plan. You see, God wasn't taking it lying down. He wasn't going to take your sin lying down, so He had a plan. He had it figured out. He stepped up, and He said, okay, son, go. Now, that's the first step. You see, sometimes we think or we act as if God is lying down. That God doesn't care, that God isn't aware, God isn't going through this. God doesn't understand. So the next time we see Jesus lying down, and over these next 3 weeks, or today and the next 2 weeks, as we get to Resurrection Sunday, I wanted to look at these times in Scripture where it says that Jesus lied down. First in the manger. So today we're going to look at the second time we see in Scripture that Jesus lays down, and it's about a year into His ministry. He's been ministering for about a year. Now, understand, I think Jesus probably laid down every night, okay? It's not like He only laid down these 4 times or 5 times and that's it. But the reality is it's only recorded 3 or 4 or 5 times where Jesus laid down. So This second occasion is in a boat. Now, it's found in Matthew 8, 23, 27, and I'm going to read it. It's one of the stories of Jesus, or one of the events in Jesus' life that is recorded in at least 3 of the Gospels. It's recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so we're going to read all 3 of those passages. It's not that long, but I just want you to hear the story from all 3 perspectives. So in Matthew, in verse 23, it says, "Then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, 'Lord, save us, we're going to drown.' He replied, 'You have little faith. Why are you so afraid?' Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the wave, and it was completely calm. And the men were amazed and asked, 'What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him.'" It's next found in Mark chapter 4, verse 35 and 41. It says that day when evening came, he said to the disciples, "Let's go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There was also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." It's also recorded in Luke in chapter 8, verses 22 to 25, and it says, "One day Jesus said to his disciples, 'Let's go over to the other side of the lake.' So they got into the boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, 'Master, Master, we're going to drown.' He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm. And he said, 'Where is your faith?' In fear and amazement, they asked one another, 'Who is this? He commands even the winds and the waves, and they obey him.'" Now, I don't know if you've done this before, or maybe you do this all the time, but whenever I read a passage that's in more than one place, especially in the Gospels where I see this story being told by 3 different people sharing this story, it's always interesting to note that there's some not discrepancies, but differences in the stories. Partly because they're different people. I'm pretty sure if any of us witnessed a car accident, every one of us would have a different opinion of what happened. Now, there would be similarities, but there would be details that would be more concerning to you than to somebody else. And so we have these 3 accounts, this one event, but recorded by 3 different people, and it's interesting what they noted. So when we first look at this event is, they get in the boat. Jesus, says, "Hey, we're going to go to the other side." They all get in the boat. And all 3 guys record this, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They all say, "Hey, we got in the boat, and we headed for the other side." And when you read it, it's kind of like, okay, well, Jesus needed to get to the other side. And he, they get in this boat. But immediately after they get in the boat, something happens. A storm comes up. Now, how many know that there are storms that come up in your life? How many have been in a storm? How many are going through a storm? How many of you know that there will be a storm coming? You see, it's just part of life. There are storms that come. Whether they're good or bad is not the point. The fact is that life is full of storms. It's a beautiful sunny day outside today, and it's wonderful. How many know the other day it wasn't so sunny and bright? right? Storms come. We can't control the weather. At least you and I can't. Now, it's interesting because this storm comes up, right? They're on the water and there's a storm. Now, look at what Matthew says. Matthew says, suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. The waves were sweeping over the boat. That's what Matthew says, right? But look at what Mark says. Nearly swamping the boat, right? It was a furious squall that came up and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. So Matthew says, hey, the waves were sweeping over the boat, but Mark goes, hey, no, it was greater than that. It was nearly swamped. Have you ever felt that way? You know, there's a storm of life and you feel like you're being swamped. You feel like the boat might go down. And then Luke says a squall came down on the lake so that the boat was being swamped and they were in great danger. Luke points out that, hey, we weren't just in the boat and the waves weren't just coming in and the boat wasn't being swamped, but we were in great danger. We were in great danger in the boat. You see, sometimes we get a better perspective when we read all three. You see, the disciples found them in a storm. Now, I want you to think a bit about this for a moment, because to me, it's kind of a really odd thing. My father was from Newfoundland. I have uncles that were fishermen. Always amazed when I would talk to my uncles who were fishermen, because it kind of blew me away that they would get in this little boat, go out into the middle of the ocean where they couldn't see land, waves like 6-8 feet tall, and they're out there fishing. And I'm like, are you insane? And the crazy part is most of them couldn't swim. They said, listen, if you fall in, it doesn't matter if you can swim, you're not making it. But I was always amazed that these fishermen would go out and honestly, they would face storms in the while they were out there. They would go out and all of a sudden a storm would come up and they would have to face that. And so when I think about this story, it's kind of funny to me. Who were the disciples?
Most of them are fishermen.
Like, there's at least 5 of them that are fishermen. John, his brother Andrew, or his brother James, Peter, Andrew, John and James, and I think Thaddeus was as well. I think those were the 5 that were fishermen. At least almost half of the disciples were fishermen. Do you think that these fishermen had ever been in the lake when there was a storm? Like, it kind of makes me laugh when I think about this. These disciples who are fishermen are freaking out. Now, either this was the biggest storm they'd ever seen in their life, or all of a sudden they forgot over a year what it was to be on the water. It says they were terrified. They feared for their lives. They were so concerned. And I just thought, that's kind of funny. The sea wasn't unknown to them. It's not like this was the first time they had gone out in a boat. You'll notice also that one of them, I think it's Mark, indicates that there were other boats other than just the disciples with them. He's the only one that does. And we never hear about the other boats. We never hear what happens. We don't even know who was in the other boats. Can I just say, even if you are aware of the condition of life that you're in, storms may come that will scare you. It doesn't matter how long you've traveled with Jesus. It doesn't matter how spiritual you are. It doesn't matter how amazing your walk is with the Lord. There will be times when storms will come that may scare you because you've never been there before. And these boys were scared. They hadn't been there before. Can you imagine this event for them? They're with Jesus, and Jesus is the one that told them to go across the lake. It wasn't the disciples that said, hey, Jesus, it's time to go. He said, hey, get the boats ready, it's time to go. We're going across the lake. Now, there's a little bit of a concern here. Who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? Come on, who is he? The Son of God, creator of the universe. Does Jesus know everything? Did Jesus know that this storm was going to come? So if Jesus knew the storm was going to come and he said to the boys, "Hey, let's go out to the other side," he knew what was coming. And what does he do? I mean, now I just want to read a few scriptures to you just to kind of help you understand. I know that we're aware of this, but I just want you to understand that the scriptures are full of comments about us going through trial and tribulation, going through storms of life. Okay? Look at this one. 1 Thessalonians. So that no one will be unsettled by these trials, for you know quite well that we are destined for them. Paul's saying to the Thessalonians, listen, trials will come. You are destined for them. Don't think for a moment that you aren't going to have a trial in your life. I'm always amazed when I hear Christians say, well, I got saved and everything should be perfect. Yeah. There's another one that's good. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. It doesn't say if you face trials, just whenever it happens. When you face a trial, guess what? It will come. Paul says this, or Peter said this, in all this you're great rejoice. In all this you greatly rejoice. Now, Now, for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that they prove genuineness of your faith, of greater work than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praises, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Peter is saying, hey, you're going to have trials, but they are to help your faith. They're to actually test and prove your faith. I'm always a little amazed at my own self when trials or storms come up, how I react. Because there are times where I'm like, yeah, okay, God, I get it. I'm going through it. I'm with you. And there are other times where I'm like, God, why is this happening? Well, it's happening because it's part of life. It's happening because it's going to come. Sometimes trials are to test our faith, not so much to destroy us. And sometimes we look at storms and we think this is going to destroy us, this is going to end us, this is not good. Sometimes God is just testing you. He's allowing those trials to come into your life so that you can be stronger. Can you imagine if we took our children, the moment they were born, we wrapped them up in bubble wrap, and we never let them get a scraped knee, never let them fall down, never let them get hurt, never let them ever to experience any kind of pain or suffering. And then when they were 13, we said, hey, okay, well, or maybe not even 13, wait till they're 18. Can you imagine if we waited till they were 18 years old, they'd never scratched, never had a cut, they were never sick. We kept them protected for so long and so safe that when they finally became 18 and okay, go away. You can leave now. We're done taking care of you. What would happen? I can guarantee the very first week, that child who is now 18 years old, who has never had a scraped knee, never gone through life's struggle as a child, is now going to face trials that they've never experienced and encountered, and it will probably break them. There is something that happens as we grow, as we mature. Now, I don't think we shouldn't protect our children, hear me. But I think there are times when trials happen. You know, when I was about maybe 10 years old, maybe not even that old, maybe like 7, my friend was visiting our house, and he had never been to the park up the road, and so we went to the park. And the park had this like railway train. It had this steel engine, and then it had a steel caboose, and it was just like a play toy in the playground. But it was this train. And we were like having fun being the conductor and the engineer. It was awesome. And we're boys. And we thought it would be really cool to get up on top of the train. And so we were up on the top of the train pretending that, we're train robbers. And I said to him, "We need to jump to the caboose." Well, he jumped to the caboose and didn't quite make it, and hit his head on the edge of the steel roof of the caboose, right in the forehead, and he had this goose egg that like stuck out like this. It was this big goose egg, and he's laying on the ground, and I'm like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "I don't know. My head hurts." I'm like, "Yeah, it probably does, I'm young." So we go home. It's not like we can hide this. Do you know, to this day, him and I are 55 years old. He'll turn 55 in April. I turned 55 in February. That happened when we were like 5 or 7. And all I have to do is say, "Hey, Lee, do you remember that day on the train when we jumped from the engine to the caboose?" And he's, "Oh, I remember." His mother still remembers. She still every once in a while says, "Hey, do you remember that day when you and Leon went up to the park?" But I'll tell you something, we learned something from that. Don't get up on the top of the train and jump, I have never been on top of a train since.
Lesson well learned.
I guess I learned my lesson. Yeah, working for the railroad. Hanging off sides of trains, I don't know. So, I mean, the reality is life has struggle. And sometimes they come in the most innocent thing. It's not like, "Oh, let's do this and it's going to be hard." These guys got in a boat. They had done this hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times. It wasn't something that seemed odd to them. But when they got to the middle of the lake, the storm comes up and they're having a freaked out moment. Peter says in chapter 4, "Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fury ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice in as much as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed with this, his glory is revealed." I don't know. I sometimes think Peter and Paul and John and the whole lot of them were a lot more spiritual than me, because I don't always feel all overjoyed when I'm going through suffering. Paul says to the Corinthians, "All this is for your benefit, so that the grace that is reaching more and more people may cause thanksgiving to overflow to the glory of God. Therefore, do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory, far outweighing them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." Now, That's a really easy passage to read when everything's good. But how do you read that when it's not? When you're going through the storm, when you're going through the trial, when you're... And you know, I've heard people say, well, you know, if God loved you, then why would he let you go through trial? Well, I told you, partly to strengthen your faith, partly to help you grow, but also this, God is just. And because he's just, he cannot just stop giving you trouble because you came to him. Did you hear that? He's just. He can't just automatically say, oh, well, they got saved, so no more trouble for them. Check them off. They don't get trouble anymore. Look at what this passage says. Jesus said this. That you may be children of your Father in heaven, he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. It rains on the just and the unjust. You know, sometimes we get this perspective that's really messed up. We think somehow, like, all of a sudden, because we're God's children, that we're excluded from the struggles of this life. I don't know about you, but if you look at the body you're in, it's breaking down. Well, at least not for you, Julia. Yours is still going up. You still got some time. Em, you got some time still. You're still going up. You two, you still got stuff. You got time. But for most of us in this room, our body's going the other way, whether you like it or not. See, there's a newborn who's gone. He's on the way up. He's got a long ways to go still. The reality is we live in a condemned world. So if we think for a moment that this world that we live in, that these bodies that are temporary, that for some moment that we're not going to have trial, we're messed up. It will come. Now, that said, look what happens when the boys are in this middle of the storm. Where do we find Jesus? Well, we find Jesus asleep. It's interesting because Matthew just says, but Jesus was sleeping. You know, there's a storm going on. The waters came. You know, I'm thinking he's in the boat. Isn't he getting wet? Like, he's laying down in the boat. Like, isn't he getting wet from the storm? I kind of wonder, like, was Jesus really sleeping or was he just waiting? Like, was he just like... How long will it take before they wake me? You know, I don't know. I mean, it says Jesus was sleeping. I think it's interesting because Mark comments that he was sleeping at the back of the boat on a cushion. He was comfortable. Now, maybe he was just so tired because the day was so long before, and that's why he was sleeping. But he's like passed out. He's in the back of the boat, sleeping on a cushion, and the boys are freaking out because of the storm. Those big, tough fishermen. And then Luke says, as they sailed, he fell asleep. I think this is funny. As they sailed, as soon as they started sailing, Jesus laid down and went to sleep. He was like, hey, I'm out. I'm out. And you know, maybe Jesus already knew, well, yeah, the storm's coming, and I'm going to have to deal with it, so I'm going to have a nap before it happens. Before they all freak out, before they lose their minds, I'm just going to have a nap. I don't know. But it's interesting that we find Jesus sleeping. And this is why it's important when we look at the fullness of the gospel, when we look at more than just Matthew or more than just Luke, when we look at the context of these stories from all three perspectives, or even four, because there are some stories that are in all four gospels, it gives us a different perspective. It gives us a fuller picture of the event. You know, there's Matthew, you know, he's telling us he's asleep, and Mark's telling us he's at the back of the boat and he's sleeping on a cushion, and Luke tells us that he went to sleep as soon as they set out. Now, just imagine you're in this storm, you're in this boat, and the storm comes up, you know, the waves are washing into the boat. All the guys are freaking out. And where's Jesus? He's sound asleep on a cushion in the back of the boat. And he's been sleeping since they set off. He's like having a good nap. He's just having a good time. Do you feel like sometimes when you're going through the storm of life that God's taking a nap? Do you feel like sometimes when you're going through the storm that you're not really sure whether God's paying attention? Like maybe he's laying down having a nap, he hasn't heard your cry. So what do the disciples do? Well, they find him sleeping, they're freaking out, the storm, so they go and wake him. Now this is an interesting thing because it says that in Matthew it says, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. Now, I love the fact that each one of these, they use a different word for Jesus. Here it's, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. Mark says, teacher, don't you care if we drown? So Matthew's writing says that they woke him and said, we're going to drown. Mark says, hey, don't you care? It gets a little bit more personal. It goes from, hey, we're going to drown to, don't you care that we're going to drown? And then in Luke, it says, Master, Master. We're going to drown. Now I can imagine, you've got this storm going on. The wind's blowing, the water's blowing, waves are coming into the boat. They're all freaking out. And Jesus is sound asleep, and he gets woken by the boys, and they're like, we're going to drown, we're going to drown. Oh, don't you care? We're going to drown. Do you see it? They want him to save him, right? They want him to save them. They want him to save them, and they think he doesn't care. And we are no different than the disciples. There are lots of times in our lives when storms come up in our lives, and we think God does not care. We think that, hey, don't you care I'm going through this? Don't you understand what this is like? Don't you understand that I might drown in this storm? Don't you understand? And it's as if God is like we think he's like us. Have you ever met somebody, and maybe that person is you, but bear with me. Have you ever met somebody that feels like their job in life is to help everyone else with their problems, even though they have problems that they need to deal with? When I was youth pastoring in Ajax a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there was a young lady in our youth group, and she was about 13, 14 at the time. She had a messed up life, very messed up life. Her mother, she was one of 4 children that her mother had. Each one of them was from a different man, and her mother was living with another man who adopted 3 of the children but did not adopt her. And she came to Christ, she came to our youth group, got saved, and really desired to serve the Lord and really desired to help people, and she was always trying to help people. And she finds this friend who she brings to church who gets saved, but her friend is even more messed up than she is. I mean, extremely messed up, to the point where she's dysfunctional in society even, just because of all of the trauma that's happened in her life. And this girl is trying to help her, but she's dealing with all of her mess. And I just said to her one day, I said, you really aren't helping her. I said, here's the problem. You're trying to pick up the garbage in her life. You're trying to take that garbage away. I said, just pretend you're driving a garbage truck, and you're trying to pick up the garbage out of her life and put it in the truck. The problem is that truck is already full with your garbage. And so what's happening is instead of it going in the truck, it's falling into the cab and falling in on you, and you're now getting covered in the garbage from her life because you already have a truck full of garbage from your life. I think it's time you emptied the garbage truck before you try to help somebody. Well, she walked that road with us for about 5 years and really got her life really together. I mean, really together. And an event happened, and instead of somebody directing her back to us, they thought they should handle it. And what she did was she ran. And she ran to BC, and she lived out there for about 1.5 years, and then came back. And when she came back, she was a mess, far from the Lord. Came back to the Lord about 4 years later. And in the meantime, during that, she had a child. And she got her life back in church, got back to God, and then ended up dying from a serious illness. And, I think so many times we want to be helpful, and sometimes we need to leave it to God and not try to take on other people's problems. Not to say that we can't help, but sometimes we need to trust God with it. And these disciples were in that situation. They were going through this thing, and I look at Jesus' response to the disciples, and I kind of, at first, I was kind of like, really, Jesus? Like, that's what you're going to say? Look at what he says. In Matthew, he says, you have little faith. Why are you so afraid? In Mark, why are you so afraid? Do you still have a faith? And Luke, where's your faith? He asked his disciples. Now, when you take this without the context of this story, it really is kind of like Jesus, like you're being pretty tough on these guys. I mean, the storm was bad. The water was coming in the boat. The boats were being swamped. I mean, they were in great danger. I mean, Jesus, like, aren't you being a little tough on them? But I want you to hear what transpired before this event. You see, sometimes we if we just take this story, we go, oh, well, why were they afraid? Well, they were afraid because of the storm. But and then Jesus, like, really, Jesus? Like, you're going to give them a hard time because there's a storm and they're afraid? If we go back at the beginning of Matthew, chapter 8, where this story is found, we go to the very first verse, we find out that there's a whole bunch of events that have happened that day prior to them getting in the boat. You see, sometimes we take things out of context and then we go, oh, Jesus, like, I can't believe you did that. But listen to the things that happened that day. First and foremost, Jesus walks up to a man with leprosy, touches him, and heals him while they're walking along the road. Miracle number 1, leper gets healed. Then they go to Peter's house. This is interesting because, they go to Peter's house and Peter's been kind of hanging out with the boys, and they go back to Peter's house and his mother-in-law is there and she's sick with a fever. Oh, no, sorry. First there's the centurion. The Roman centurion comes to Jesus and says, hey, my servant is sick. Would you come and heal him? And would you heal him? And Jesus said, well, I'll come. And the centurion said, no. I'm a man that takes orders. And you know what? All you have to do is speak it, and I believe that it'll happen. And Jesus says to his disciples at that moment, he says to them, truly, I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. This Roman centurion. So we have the leper that gets healed, this Roman centurion who trusts Jesus and goes away, and his servant's healed. He doesn't even take Jesus to the servant. because of his faith. And Jesus said, hey, well, I don't find anyone in Israel like this. Then he goes to Peter's house. He goes into Peter's house where his mother-in-law is sick with a fever. And Jesus heals his mother-in-law, and she gets up and makes them dinner. So it goes from a leper who's supposed to stay away from people to a centurion who's Roman who, they don't want anything to do with. Then they go to Peter's house and he heals his mother-in-law. Now just think about that for a moment. It is his mother-in-law, it's not his mother, obviously he had a good relationship with his mother-in-law because she made him dinner. But here's the thing. They go back to Peter's house and he heals his mother-in-law. So now we've seen a leopard healed, the centurion's servant healed, Peter's mother-in-law is now healed. And then it says he healed many demon-possessed that were brought to him. It doesn't tell us how many, but it tells us that there was more than one person who was demon-possessed that came and was healed and set free. This is what was transpiring prior to them getting in the boat. It's quite a day. They've seen miracle after miracle after miracle. They've seen the faith of a centurion, which is greater than all of Israel. And on top of that, during this time, Mark and Luke tell us that Jesus taught a whole bunch of parables to them during this time. They had a full day. A full day with Jesus. This was like the end of his first year of ministry. They had been walking with him for about a year. They had encountered all these things. Can you imagine the kind of day they had? Can you just imagine if one of those things happened in your life? How ecstatic you would be that, if a storm came up, you go, oh, well, I know what Jesus did this morning, so hey, not a big deal. No, they're terrified. And so Jesus gives them a hard time. He says, hey, where is your faith? Were you not with me today? Did you not see what happened today? Where is your faith? Why are you so downtrodden? Why are you so afraid? Why are you fearful? Where is your faith? Think about that. They had had an incredible day with Jesus prior to this event on the lake. Prior to getting in the boat, they had had a pretty crazy day. People were healed, people were set free, people were delivered. Jesus taught them a whole bunch of parables. It's a pretty crazy day, and then this storm comes out. I said this to you a number of weeks ago. I said, as God moves in our family, don't be surprised if distractions come. Don't be surprised if God does a miracle one day and the next day you're distracted by something. Don't be surprised that when you think everything is good and everything look amazing, all of a sudden a storm hits. These things happen. And this is where the disciples were at. Can you imagine, though, they experienced so much before they got in that boat. And yet their faith was weak. Now here's the important part about the whole story. It's not that Jesus was asleep. It's not that the storm came. It's not that the disciples were low in their faith. It's not any of that. The most exciting part about this is that Jesus stands up. He gets up from where he's laying and he deals with the storm. Matthew says that he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Mark says he got up, rebuked the winds and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And the wind died down and it was completely calm. And lastly, Luke says he got up and rebuked the winds and the raging water, and the storm subsided and all was calm. Do you know you can have peace in the middle of a storm? You can have a storm going on and have peace. You can actually encounter the peace of God even when life is throwing you through a storm. Now, this shouldn't surprise us at all that Jesus settled calmed the sea down. Now, picture this. Remember what I said about all those events that happened prior to them getting in the boat? And then they're like freaked out and can't believe, who is this man that he can even speak to the wind and tell it to stop? Who is this man that he can speak to the waves and tell them to settle down? They're all kind of surprised by this. All of creation responds to his voice. Sometimes we think things are impossible because we don't really understand who we serve. The disciples were in the boat. They forgot who was in the boat with them. They didn't really realize who was in the boat with them. They really didn't have a grasp yet of who Jesus was. They were still thinking he was just a good teacher. They were still thinking, well, this is a great teacher. We hang out with him. People get healed. People get fed. It's a pretty good deal. But I don't think they really understood who was in the boat with them. You see, the wind and the waves that he created responded to him instantly. You see, when the storms of life come, and they will, do we realize who's in the boat with us? Do we recognize who he is? Do we really understand that he comes to bring peace in the middle of the storm? The biggest problem the disciples had wasn't their faith, wasn't the water, wasn't the boat, wasn't their skills as sailors. It was the fact that they did not know who was in the boat with them. They were lost without knowing who was in the boat. The creator of everything was with them. Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Do we realize that the one we serve, the one we call Lord and Savior, is also the Prince of Peace? As I was getting ready and preparing this and just going through my notes, I was reminded of this fact that Jesus, the Prince of Peace, we so want God to change the storm when we should be just seeking him, the Prince of Peace. The one who can bring peace and clarity in the midst of the storm, the one who can stop the waves from rolling, the one who can keep the wind from blowing, the one who speaks and everything is commanded to do what he says. Do you realize that that's who you serve? That's who saved you, set you free. The one who, when he can lay down and it doesn't matter. Before Jesus left, after his resurrection, he said this to the disciples: "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. Peace, I leave you with peace. My peace. How many know that God's peace is greater than your peace? How many know that the Prince of Peace brings peace that you can't get on your own? You know, last week we talked about the shepherds, and they were out in the field and they were terrified when the angels showed up. And I think it's interesting because here we see Jesus speaking peace over the wind and the waves, telling it to be calm. And yet the angel said to the shepherds on that night when they showed up, They said, "Glory to God in the highest heavens, and on earth peace to those of whom his favor rests." The King James says, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men." It's interesting if you read Eugene Peterson's comments about the angels. It's kind of like it's hilarious because the angels just kind of say, "Peace has come." That little baby who laid in a manger, peaceful, was the Prince of Peace. He was the one that was going to bring peace to your soul and to mine. No matter what storm you are in, no matter what trial you go through, no matter what situation you're living in right this moment, he can bring peace. He can bring peace. He is the Prince of Peace. As we go further down this road of where Jesus lays down, can I just say that God won't take your sin laying down, but he wants to be there so that you can lay down. The disciples didn't really know who was in the boat. Kayla, I'm going to ask you to come. Do you know who's in the boat with you today? Do you recognize that whatever you're going through, good, bad, or indifferent, whether it's a health issue or a storm, a family situation, a life situation, no matter how big the waves seem, no matter how much the boat may feel like it's sinking, do you recognize who's in the boat with you? Because he's in the boat. He's in the boat. The creator of the universe, the one who spoke it into existence, is the same one that's in the boat with you today. He's the same one that wants to speak peace to your situation. And I can tell you this, that Jesus cares that you're going through what you're going through. He just wants to bring peace. And you may have to go through a little bit of the storm before the peace comes. You may have to go through the situation. You may have to go through and wonder where God is in the midst of it. Can I just tell you, he's still in the boat. The reality is that the disciples were never in danger that night. They were never in danger. No matter how big the waves seemed, no matter how bad the wind was blowing, they were never in danger because Jesus, the creator of the universe, the Savior of their soul, was in the boat with them. Can I say to you today that no matter what you're going through, if Jesus is in the boat with you, you're going to get through. Will you trust him today? Will you seek him, seek the Prince of Peace as opposed to the peace of the storm? So many times we want God to fix things instead of just spending time with him. We go to God and we go, we need this, we need that, we want you to fix this, we want you to heal that, we want you to do this. And we just need to be in the boat with him. We need to actually just say, you know what, Jesus, I'm going to go in the boat with you. I'm going to cross over to the other side, even if the storm comes. Even if the trial comes, even if it's hard, I'm going to go with you because I'm better and safer in the boat with you than I am on my own. I don't know about you, but I think I can trust him. I think the one that spoke everything into existence, John tells us that everything was made by him and through him. And he's the one that we serve. So I'm just going to encourage you before we go downstairs, if you're going through something today, if you're going through a storm, if you're going through a situation, I would encourage you to come and find a place at the altar where God can minister to your soul and your heart and take away the fear and the doubts and the worries and to bring peace in the storm. Because he is in the boat with you today. He is not off at a distance. He's not asleep somewhere. He hasn't forgotten you. The same one that spoke everything into existence is the same one who's in the boat with you right now. The question is, will you stay in the boat with him or will you bail? And I don't mean bail as in take the water out of the boat. I mean jump out of the boat. So would you come this morning? Kayla's just going to play, and I would just encourage you before you go downstairs to find a place, even if it's just where you are, to just say to God, God, I'm tired of going through the storm without you. I just need your peace. I need you in the midst of this storm. Would you do that this morning? Whether it's here at the altar, whether it's where you're sitting, but let's just take some time and seek his face. Lunch will be ready when we get down there. We don't have to rush. It's still early. But let's just seek the Lord this morning. Hallelujah, Lord God. If you want to come, come. And we'll pray with you and encourage you. Just be encouraged today. Know who's in the boat with you. Seek the Prince of Peace. Hallelujah, Lord God. Hallelujah, Lord God. Sure.